Sarah Pidgeon stars in the new play Stereophonic on Broadway. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Sarah, I wanted to start by asking you, this show is all about the kind of personal and professional dynamics of 70s rock music, which is so exciting to see on stage. Is there any 70s bands or musicians that you really love from that era that helped you kind of assess the material as you were starting your journey with the show?
Um, I think I definitely delved into some music. I think less to sort of create a character, a blueprint, or take inspiration from these iconic figures, but I think more to just sort of understand what the vibe, who their competition might have been as this fictional band. I listened to the big one, uh, Fleetwood Mac. Um, and some of the mamas and the papas, I talked to some friends that are quite knowledgeable in terms of music, and they gave me some recommendations. But I think more than anything, I really tried to look at the script. I think the messaging from the creatives was that this is, well, it's a fake band. For all intents and purposes, it's a real band in this world. And Diana was who she was on the page, not sort of this Frankenstein of different iconic female singers in the 70s, which I think gave me a lot more freedom to decide who this person was, and for her to live fully in the world that takes place in this in this recording studio. But yeah, I've got a whole playlist of songs that people, and there's in our company, Chris Stack, he knows a lot of music. Will Butler knows a lot of music. Juliana Canfield also knows a lot of music. So when they would come out with songs that I hadn't heard of, I would add it to a list. And yeah, I'd like to think that I know a little bit more about that time period than I did going into it.
Yeah, I have to imagine doing the show, you just pick up a lot. There are a lot of great references in the show too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too. You started this show at Playwrights Horizons last year, so you've been with it for a while. How has the experience between that production off Broadway and now changed? What was it like then, and what has it been like transferring it to a bigger stage, bigger reception? It's quite a journey.
I mean, it's all been really exciting. When I signed up for this, it was not on my radar at all that this could be transferring. I just really wanted to do the project. I thought the writing was incredible. Yeah, it was just one of those things that I should have felt compelled to do. And I think what's changed the most is that as a ensemble, the seven of us have all gotten much closer. We were at Playwrights. I think we did a convincing job, but we were sort of playing at this idea of knowing each other. I mean, I think Peter and Diana or at least are dating for 9 years. I think in my backstory that I've created, they've known each other for even longer. I think he sort of like taught her how to drive and things like that. But Tom Pecinka and I didn't know each other. We met on August 21st, I think. So I think just having that whole experience at Playwrights, having some time off, and there was just so much space in there to get to know each other. And same with Juliana Canfield. I have a really strong friendship in Juliana, and I loved her from the minute I met her, but that we've actually had time to sort of grow and establish that intimacy as the performers. And I think that's sort of carried through in all the relationships in the show. We're not playing at this idea of having been collaborators for years. At this point, we're coming up on a year of like continuing to crack this chestnut open. And I think that's sort of bled through into our performances in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, you're saying that you didn't know what the journey would be when you signed on to the project, which of course is true, and it's just blossomed so beautifully in terms of the audience response. The critical response has been sensational. And Diana's journey, I think, is very similar to a lot of the companies where you're getting a taste of what success is like in this incredible play. And Diana certainly seems to have some trepidation or doesn't quite know how to grapple with that kind of exposure and success. Does that facet of the character resonate with you more now that you've been on this train for a year than when you signed on to do the play at Playwrights?
Yeah, I think that what's so beautiful about this experience is that it's all been incredibly insular. Um, I thinking about this time opening and having critics come, such a different experience at playwrights. I think we were still sort of figuring out, like, can we do it? Can this play, are we able to make this 3-hour play make sense with all of its different elements? And I think I'm just so grateful to have a company that cares so much about the play that we're doing that night, and sort of the noise kind of falls away. I'm so grateful that there's been such a strong response, and I think it sort of echoes how I felt when I read the play for the first time. It's very human, it's quite evocative, it's very moving, and I'm just so glad that we've been able to sort of channel that into performances, and it's been so well received. I'm just sort of over the moon about it.
We get some brilliant music in this play. It's definitely a play, but there's some wonderful original songs in it, including Diana's composition "Bright," which is so gorgeous. And I don't know exactly if we hear the entire piece of it at any point in the show, because supposedly, according to Peter, it's far too long. But it's such a gorgeous song, and you perform it so beautifully. What does that lyric mean to you as you sit at the piano and you play it? It's a very vulnerable song, and just so beautiful. But what does that mean to you as you're performing it, those lyrics in particular?
I think she's certainly grappling with what you mentioned earlier of, her relation to fame and like who this person is, who this forward-facing person is. Because I think sort of similar to Diana and me for coming on to the show at Playwrights, I don't think she really had an intention of being a rock star. She liked writing. She liked writing music with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend was sort of better at it. And he kind of, he knew how to do it. And she just enjoyed making this music with him. But I think Bright, there's, multiple times throughout the show where she talks about her relationship to fame, and, her song is the one that's charting. And so it's a very individual experience. While this band is on the rise, it's because of Diana's songwriting. And there's after the first rendition, Diana has that monologue about the mask in her dream, and I don't think it's any mistake that then we go back into Bright again. And the lyrics are, I'm in the bright light forgetting my name, the shadow of our lives familiar but strange. So I think it's just she wants this thing. There's this like subconscious desire and like hunger to explore this version of herself, and this is the only way that she can do it. And she is so good at it that it begets success and critical acclaim. But I think it's so alien to her, and because she's been in this environment that's so cut off from the outside world, and her individual relationships are so strong and sort of all-consuming, that I think that takes a lot of precedent over grappling with this sort of new persona and like branch of life that she's trying to navigate. I think through her music, she does a lot of investigation of that, of, like, what is this thing? Who is this person? If I expose myself to this world and try to navigate it, does that mean it's a fake version of myself? Or is it just that version of Diana, and that's how she navigates it? So I think for Diana, she's quite a big feeler. I don't think she always has the words to sort of wrap them up and present them in even in her music. It's still very exploratory and full of questions, and I think just very reflective.
Yeah, you mentioned too a little bit of the backstory you've created for Diana, especially with her relationship with Peter. I just have to hear more about that, because we meet them, as you said, they've been together for 9 years, and it's a really tumultuous period in their relationship that we're observing. But I think the audience has to wonder, like, what drew them together in the first place, and what has brought them to this moment. So what else did you kind of fill in that backstory with, especially in conversation with Tom and with David and with Daniel, your playwright and director?
Yeah, what was interesting about this process is we didn't have a whole lot of table work. I think there was such a so much, not pressure, but anxiety to like do the thing. And there was a lot of stuff that we had to get done back at Playwrights. But personally, I was sort of doing some, you know, making a backstory, and I think some crosses over with Tom, but we didn't have like a whole. We didn't really sit down and like hash it out. But I think that she has known him. They grew up in a small town in Phoenix, and he's always been in her life. And he's a few years older than her. This is the 1970s, so things were a little different back then. But I think that he has been this like all-knowing creative force in her life. Like I said, I think he taught her how to drive. Like I think he taught her how to do all of these things. And as we see them 9 years later, I think it's really important that they had a really beautiful, strong sort of like other half connection. And that's what makes it, because if that doesn't exist, then the breakup is not as painful, and her journey is not as, I think, painful for her to navigate on her own. But I think a significant part of her adult development has been in tandem with Peter. And I think that she was just willing to do everything for this man. You know, she was working at the old folks home and changing diapers so that, you know, he could write the music. And I think that's when her success, when that comes into play, it's this, she can't deny these feelings anymore, you know. And I think for a while before the beginning of the play, they had these fights, you know. The idea of having a family, that's not a new fight. They've had it a lot. And maybe that happened before they ever met up with the Brits and joined this band. So I think that when her success and climbing the charts really starts coming into it, it starts hacking away at all of these sort of foundational, the pillars of their relationship that she's been able to rely on, whether or not they've been the healthiest or the most honest reflection of how she feels. And I think everything just sort of starts tumbling down. You know, it's not just in this play, but everyone I think understands that in their own life when you're in a partnership or a friendship and then some outside force happens, it puts a magnifying glass, I think, on aspects of your relationship that become really, really hard to turn your head away from.
Yeah, I think all the work that you've done explaining this and working it out for yourself really comes across in that scene that you and Tom share. It's in the second act before the intermission. So the second act of the four, that really kind of big confrontation that's so complex. I mean, that's such an extraordinary scene and performance. And it leads into this song Masquerade, which I have not stopped thinking about, kind of singing to myself since I saw the show last week. I mean, it's such an extraordinary song and such an extraordinary moment of watching the band kind of find it. And then the euphoria of seeing them, you know, hear it after they've recorded it, and the excitement. I mean, it's so palpable for the audience. Is it just kind of like euphoric and ecstatic for you guys to come together, play it, get it right, you know, according to the band, and then just listen back and wait for that intermission? I mean, it's such a high to end on. What does it feel like for you guys to kind of play that scene? Because it's hard, but it's so rewarding, I think, for the audience at least.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first song that we hear in its entirety throughout the show. I think it's actually the only song that we hear in its entirety. Another great writing moment from David Adjemi. But what's interesting, having the repetition of the show and doing it 8 times a week, I think it's sort of, we like begin to lock in, and this hasn't always been the case, because as we do it more, we're getting better at it and locking in more as a band. But it's like, I think our radar for how we're listening to each other, and like, if we personally as performers felt really good about that show, I think that really locks in. And it's sort of, I mean, I think the least amount of stress in that scene because I don't have to play the music over and over again. I think I sing like 2 lines throughout the 6 takes we do of it. And, it's a lot of waiting, and it's, Chris Stack is behind me, and he's, bubbling up with fury over Grover wanting to use a click track. And it's just a lot of energy in the room. But yeah, every time we get there and we get to play it back, it's really cathartic to hear the response from the audience, because that room is really soundproof. So there's sort of like with the immediacy of theater, which is so exciting. And, when you're on the lip of the stage and you can really hear it, such a different experience being back there and opening those doors and hearing people clap and, catching the occasional head bob. I think it just sort of tickles me as a performer to think like, oh yeah, this exists beyond the sound room. And it's gratifying to know how effective the play is, especially because the audience is sitting for like an hour and 45 minutes up until that point, just doing a lot of listening and I think wrapping their head around what this play is as well. So that moment of the song playing out in the celebration, I think it's just such a great way to end Act 1. And then we come back in for Act 2 and it's like a sucker punch.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you next, because that's such a great, another great moment of playwriting where we're on this high at the end of Act 1, and then Act 2 is such a kind of devastating scene for you that we open with, where you're singing that kind of vocal performance in the room, doing a vocal recording, you're singing a cappella, and it's a really tough scene, I think, for the audience to watch. I wanted to ask you, like, how vulnerable is that moment for you? Obviously, Diana is having this is one of the hardest moments of the show for her, but how is it for you to perform that? I mean, your voice needs to be cracking, and, it's such a kind of bare and kind of, emotionally naked moment. So what is that like for you?
Yeah, I'm always really anxious. I'm really scared that my voice, I'm not nervous about cracking. That I can do. I'm nervous about actually hitting the note when I have to hit it. And it's also after crying and fighting and whispering at each other. So I have like this little mini water bottle backstage that I just chug right after our fight. And I think that scene, it's actually, I think, one of the moments in the play where the glass doesn't feel like a piece of protection like it has through so much of the other play. I think particularly with singing, I'm an actor who sings, not a singer. So that is just very, very vulnerable for me. But in that scene, the stage before her is quite dark, and then there's these lights that are warming her up, and she's just looking down at these 3 men who she knows she can't lose her cool in front of, because then she'll become completely undermined by her lack of professionalism. And I think she just feels like I feel like I'm in this fishbowl, and every single mistake I do, because it's just my voice and, you can't hear the backing track. It's just so heightened. And yeah, I just sort of start feeling my blood boil a little bit. And, it's like she hits every single roadblock, whether it be with her voice or, not standing close enough to the microphone. And then Grover is mansplaining, how to get picked up on this God mic. And then her boyfriend, just denying her any sense of like calm or assurance. It's just so well written. I think what I keep coming back to is just what an incredible job David Adjemi did. I think there are some days where I just say, oh God, I don't think I'm doing my best acting. I'm glad I get to do that scene again. But if all I can do right now is say the lines, the play is strong enough that that's all that really matters. And it just does so much of the work for you. It's almost like doing like a show, like a survival show, and there's like wind and there's rain, and you don't have to do much acting because you're just existing in it. And I think that's the same for the environment that they've been able to create on the page and on stage.
Before I let you go, Sarah, I have to ask you, I think audiences would gladly sit for another 3 hours watching the journey of this band. And the play ends on such a kind of ambiguous place. We won't say exactly what for folks who haven't seen it, but where do you think, if you've thought about it, where do you think these characters, especially Diana, goes after the kind of, fade to black at the end of this show?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, everyone has their own idea. We talk about it sometimes backstage. So I don't want to share anybody else's, but I can share what I think happens to Diana. And I think she does this solo album. I think it does well, but I think she knows, like, that same sense of feeling. It's like this dull pounding ache in her that she knows her album would have been better if she did it with Peter. And I think it's this recognition that, which I think the whole play is about. And I remember David Adjemi's program note at the beginning, and it's wrestling with, can you make art without all the stuff that comes along with it, and the sacrifices and the relationships that fall apart because of this just absolute need. And I think that Diana and Peter sort of come back around and they make some more music, but I think just so much crap happens in between. And I think they might convince themselves that they never see each other again, but like the universe knows that that's absolutely not possible, and that these two can really, they feed off each other as much as they hurt each other and tear each other down. And I think it's just this sort of I hope that when Diana's, well, no, I think even at the end of the play, she says, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I think she's just at this place where, like, she takes the good with the bad. And, she loves these people, and that there is no every action she has in pursuing this life has a reaction. And I think she just sort of accepts that shit can happen. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. She accepts that this sadness that comes along with this creative process, it's just a part of it. And I think it fuels it. It's what writes the songs. And I think personally, I mean, this creative process has been so drama-free and so fulfilling, and going to rehearsal is just such a kind, warm, happy place. But I think sometimes as a performer, your life is reflected in the art that you do. And I'm listening to these scenes backstage, or I'm listening to the words come out of my mouth, and it's like, sorry, there must be a package. It's how did David Adjemi know that I would need to hear this, despite not knowing me when he cast me in the thing? It's just, yeah, I don't know, maybe it's like a fortune cookie in that way, where like you get what you want out of it. But I do think a lot of it is credited to just how human and exacting David Adjemi was in his writing. Yeah, it's a gift and a joy to do it every night, sometimes twice.
Well, it's an exceptional show, and you're exceptional in it. Sarah Pidgeon, congratulations on Stereophonic. Thank you so much for talking to Nicole today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.